Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Tech Alley. For those who don't know, I'm Tim May, host, and what we're doing today is we brought in Erik from AWS. He's an Amplify evangelist, right?
Yeah, serverless developer advocate slash Amplify slash a little bit of everything.
And what's that got to do with AI? Well, they're doing lots of cool stuff with AI today, so Erik's going to give you guys an introduction to that. I'd also like to pitch another event that he's doing later in the week at Blackfire Innovation. He's doing a hands-on lab, so if you have any interest in doing something hands-on. Maria is, hosting the AI Meetup there, so I'd like you to come. I'll be there. See you. Come. Anyway, I'll turn it over to Erik.
Great. Does that microphone work? Or?
We do have a microphone, and we have questions. Wave at me, and I'll bring it over to you. So, you already have your microphone.
I'm already mic'd up.
You're already mic'd up.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. I'll try to speak up, so if you guys can't hear me, let me know. So yeah, thank you for the introduction, Tim. Yep, I'm Erik Hanchett. I'm a senior developer advocate at AWS, and I deal with all things serverless and front end with something called AWS Amplify. So before I start, I just want to ask, by a show of hands, who has heard of AWS Amplify? Okay, good. Some people. Who's heard of AWS? That should be about everyone, right? So AWS has like hundreds of different services, and Amplify is one of those that can help front-end and full-stack developers create apps. And so in this talk today, we're going to look at how AWS Amplify can create full-stack apps using AI. And we're going to go and do a few examples, and then I do have a little bit, not as much as we'll have later, with Maria and her meetup, but we'll also look at a little bit of live coding. So here's the agenda. So we have idea to app, and we're going to talk about Gen 2, which is the latest version in this Amplify. We're going to look at some of the benefits, maybe some reasons this may not be the right solution. It's not the right solution for everybody. We're going to look at data auth storage. Then, since this is an AI meetup, we're going to look at Gen AI and, of course, Amazon Bedrock. Has anybody tried DeepSeek yet, by the way? Oh, yeah, it's been getting a lot of news lately. I'll mention that a little bit. Then we'll look at some architecture, Q&A, and a demo. And then I'm going to leave plenty of time at the end to ask me questions. I also, come up to me afterwards and talk to me. I have a few credits, AWS credits, for people who are creating cool projects. So if you can come to me and show me a cool AWS project you're working on, I might be able to hook you up with some credits. All right, so let's imagine that we're creating the next AI-powered app. What website is this? Amazon. Yeah, that's Amazon.com, right? So for those who don't know, Amazon has been using AI in some form or another for many, many years. They have this recommendation engine in the background. So let's say you buy toilet paper one day and the next day you buy a video game. It's going to come up with this like recommendation. It's going to look at your preferences and try to come up with what they think that you might want to buy in the future. And it's been a part of Amazon for years, even before this AI blow up we've had in the last couple of years. So if we're thinking about how we want to create our modern day Amazon.com today, or any AI powered app, we need to think of a few kind of building blocks that we want to have with every app. So let's think of a few. Well, if we want to create the next Amazon.com or AI powered app, we'll probably need to think of authentication. And don't worry, this will tie back into this overall theme of creating AI powered apps. So auth would be anything like how your user signs in, signs out. Maybe they want to do multi-factor authentication or one-time password. Does anybody use Cognito here? Have heard of Cognito? Oh, there's one, a few. Okay. What do you guys use? Clerk, Auth0, Auth0? Okay. So every one of these points I'm going to show you today, AWS has a service that you can use. So on AWS side, Cognito would be in the auth. We probably want to think of data and where we want to store that data. And there's a lot of different places you can do that. Who's SQL, NoSQL fans here? Guessing there's a few of both. Storage, S3. One of the original, someone was saying, oh, Tim was saying he was back, he did use AWS back in the day, right? You probably used S3 right away.
EC2 and S3, yeah.
EC2, S3, one of the original services that AWS created back all the way back in the 2000s. So you might have a website that has pictures, right? Or you might have data that you need to save somewhere, and you probably want to save that in storage. A function, so we want to have serverless compute. We want to be able to do some kind of compute that's not powered on the front end side. So we have Lambda functions and things like that. And I'd say most modern apps, once you get a little bit more complicated, need some place to run serverless code that you don't want to necessarily run on the client side. Hosting is important because we want to make sure our website is hosted somewhere that's globally available, that it comes up in a few seconds, that when you run that Google Lighthouse score, that it shows that it's all green and that's all working correctly for you, that you're not having weird things like shifting, and that the CDN works right, and if you're in all parts of the country, it works well. And of course, we're at a Gen AI meetup, so we have to mention Gen AI. I know some people have been using Gen AI in their apps. Has everyone been using Gen AI? Some people have. Okay. Can anybody tell me what use case? Like, what use cases have you been using Gen AI in your apps? Like what you've been using to like summarize text, or?
I actually just started using, well, not, this is the most recent, not that I just started using it, but I have been using Copilot for a long time, GitHub Copilot for code completion, tasks, things like that. And then recently I've started to use it to analyze PRs and give me a summary.
Oh, that's a really nice feature.
Yeah.
Yes. So Gen AI can be anything from how you create your applications with like GitHub Copilot, or you might be using Amazon Q. Is on the AWS Amazon side. That's a code completion tool that you can add to your editor for free. It works for VS Code, a whole bunch of extensions. We'll talk about it a little bit later in the code in the talk here. And then also we have a service called Amazon Bedrock, which we'll talk about later as well. So it's really a lot of really neat things happening in the Gen AI space. It's going super quick. Now, those are kind of the main things, but there's so many other things you have to think of when you're trying to create a modern application. Performance, like scale, like can you go from 1,000 users hitting your website a day to 1 million? How does that scale? We talked a little bit about reliability and global frameworks, Vue, Angular, React. Maybe you're using Ruby. Any Vue, Angular, React fans? Yep, one, two, few. I'm a huge React fan. I'm a huge Vue.js fan. Then the economics. We also want to not have to pay thousands of dollars. I just heard a story about what you said, an EC2 instance, or you said an EC2 instance you had to keep running for accidentally and hundreds of dollars. So definitely want to make sure we don't do that. And then security. AWS is by far, our number one goal is to have security in mind everything we do. It's top priority for us, and so that's definitely something our users also have to keep in mind as well. And then that can be for any sorts of sites. We've mostly been talking about like an Amazon.com, but it could be any sort of e-commerce, media streaming, social media, online gaming, any of these sites you'd want to have many of these features that we're talking about right now. So here comes AWS Amplify, and I did see a few hands at the beginning of people have heard of it, so let's talk about it a little bit more. So Amplify is mostly heard about of our hosting service. So you think of Amplify as a set of tools to help front-end developers create full-stack sites. And one of the primary reasons people use Amplify is to host their website. And so it has all the nice things that you expect from a hosting service. So you can host your static sites. Next.js is really popular. We handle Next.js sites or server-side rendered apps, your server components, server routes, things like that. We actually just recently added in some more firewall tooling to it. And it's built on top of we of course dog food all our own services, so it's built on top of CloudFront and Lambda. Oh, did you have a question?
Yes, so would this be like AWS's version of Netlify or Vercel?
Exactly, yep, yeah, so if you guys have heard of Vercel or Netlify, I'll repeat the question. He's asking is this like the same as like Vercel or Netlify or kind of these hosting providers? Yes, this is AWS's managed hosting service. So we abstract all that complexity away. You don't have to create your own CloudFront distributions and set that all up. We do that all for you. And then we have things like CI/CD deployments, full stack deployments, and so you can actually host your front end, but also you can manage your back end. And then you can tie that into whatever CI/CD, continuous integration to continuous deployment that you have. Oh, another question?
Fargate or ECS, it doesn't more for you.
Yes, so this is completely managed. So certainly there's a lot of different ways to do things on AWS. You can containerize everything. Some people use ECS or Fargate and Dockerize everything. But this is like a managed service that you can take your site. It connects directly up to your version control system. So if you're using GitHub, you can do a push, and then it directly goes to.
So even more than Firebase.
Yes, yeah. So it connects directly to like GitLab, GitHub. You push, and it'll build your site through there. Oh, here, take another question.
Is there a direct integration between Code Catalyst and Amplify?
Can we wait for the mic so the camera can pick it up, please? Question?
Thank you. The question was, is there a direct integration between Code Catalyst and Amplify?
So yes, you can connect those two up. I'd have to look up the details though on how exactly that works. But I can get back to you on that for more information. And then just more features in Amplify hosting. Because a lot of people don't even know we have a managed hosting service, I found out. You can do multiple environments mapped to branches. We have custom domains. Of course, Amazon Route 53 is the way you can do your DNS and registrar information. So you can basically get the name for your website. You can of course use any domain name registrar and point your A records over. You can also set up rewrites, redirects, fine-grained access controls, meaning that you can specify who can have access to what, and you can have notifications. There's actually a hook you can build in, so you can, like in your CI/CD deployment, like if you're using Jenkins or another deployment system, you can hook that directly in and send a hook out to start building. So the second part, before we start this video here, is, so this is one big feature, and this is all kind of tied into this AI we're going to talk about in a second. The next big feature is we found that a lot of developers using AWS, there's so many different ways to create apps on AWS. Name some ways you guys create apps on AWS. Shout it out. Like anybody use like infrastructure as code tools?
Terraform.
Yeah, Terraform, exactly. So Terraform's like a really common way. CDK, another really common way. These are like tools you write your infrastructure as code, and then it basically creates the infrastructure for you. But we found is that we wanted to have like a simpler layer on top of that, so that me, or as a front-end developer, I don't have to be an expert in AWS and know IAM security rules. We're going to have some same defaults and high security, so that way you can start right away. And so we came up with something called Gen 2. So on the left-hand side is the client. On the right-hand side is the server. So in real time, I can create a schema. And the schema says, hey, I'm creating, of course, the canonical to-dos app. But I'm creating a to-do. I'm adding like latitude and longitude. And on the left-hand side, the client, it automatically sees that I have added it on the server side. So now I'm like, I know I have IntelliSense here. I'm adding a priority that says add low, medium, or high. And now the client already knows, like, I can only choose high, low, or medium. So we kind of took this abstraction and we said, hey, if you want to create your data model, you could just write it in this nice little schema here. And this will be then available in the front end. And it has some things, if you use Zod and this kind of inference in JavaScript, it has these really nice tools to easily create a data model. Now, this is just one instance if you're just creating data, but we also have these kind of abstractions. They're almost like If you use CDK, there's things called constructs. This is almost like a level 4 construct. So just with a few lines of code, you can run this command on your command line. This lives in the same place as your front-end code, and then it'll deploy your infrastructure for you. So we wanted to make it really straightforward to create infrastructure on AWS. Do you have a question? Yeah, feel free to stop me at any time. These are good questions.
And so you need to have Amplify to have access to this, and is it a plugin that you can integrate with IntelliJ or VS Code? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the way it works is it's an NPM package that you can just run, and it creates a couple of folders in your front-end code, and then you can then run a command in your command line, and we'll deploy an ephemeral environment for you. And then when you're ready, you can use Amplify hosting and then actually hosting it like in production. And that'll be connected to your version control system. So you can have like different branches for like dev, production, dev, QA, production, things like that. So yeah, to get started, it's just as long as you have Node installed, you can just run a couple of commands. It'll create some boilerplate code for you, and then you can start editing it. You can run another command and actually start testing locally. And I'll show you that in the demo a little bit more. Of course, you'll need to have an AWS account, and if you want to run commands to actually create infrastructure, you'll need to set up like Identity Center and have it. It just takes a one-time step to set it up, so that way your command line knows your AWS credentials and you can actually create the infrastructure. So we created this Gen 2, which is like another layer to make it a little bit simpler, but it's built on top of CDK, so you can always drop down to CDK, Cloud Development Kit, if you like to create infrastructure that way. But this is kind of like another layer. And then we created, and by the way, everything I'm telling you today is like a la carte. So if you're like, hey, I already used Terraform today, I don't really want to use this Gen 2, you're fine. You can use some of these other pieces if you like, and you can use that with your app. So we created a bunch of libraries. Well, in this case, we created a UI library for authentication. And we created these pre-built UI components you can just drop into your applications and add authentication, and it adds like a sign-in screen, a sign-up screen. It does the multi-factor authentication, does single sign-on, and it's just a few lines of code you add in. You just install this JavaScript or TypeScript library into your app. And you have to do a little configuration if you already have an AWS app. You have to put in some parameters, but it's not too big of a deal. We also have Amplify data. You saw earlier that demo. This is more about data. So we are opinionated in Amplify that if you want to use data, this is backed by AppSync, which is our managed GraphQL service. But at this point, it's really abstracted away, so it's not like you're writing GraphQL the way you probably think of it. We have this really high-level language library that makes it much simpler to do all the things you want to do: create, read, update, delete, list, do relationships, all that. And GraphQL and this AppSync service has DynamoDB as its database underneath, and you can always access Dynamo. You can use a SQL database as well. We have options for doing that. And we also had AppSync events, which just came out recently, which is a way to do like this pub-sub communication and get information back rather than using something like WebSockets. And I actually have a demo of that too. Oh, we have a question?
So that's basically similar to R2 from SignalR, from Microsoft.
From where?
SignalR from Microsoft.
I haven't used that, but I'm guessing that sounds similar. Yep.
It's very, the thing about SignalR is there was no similar capability in AWS. Mm-hmm. With AppSync events, you basically have filled that hole. So folks that are stuck on Microsoft Azure because they rely on SignalR could potentially move over to AWS now.
Nice. Yes, and it has. It's been very popular. People really like this way of sending information back and forth. A very simple API, and it also can be put behind Cognito. So if you want to have authentication built in, it's there. We also have storage. So this is another common thing, kind of going back to the beginning of this talk where I said, hey, what are the tools you need to build like modern AI apps today? You probably want to use something like storage. And so we have like client libraries. that allow you to upload, download data, get signed URLs as well. And we have a new feature we just released called Storage Browser. Has anybody heard of Storage Browser? Hey, one person has seen the talk before. The Storage Browser component gives you the user's simple visual interface to connect to S3 buckets, which is kind of fun. I have a demo of it. It has audio, but we don't probably have audio, so I could just talk over the video, I suppose. Let's see if it runs.
Storage Browser for Amazon S3.
Hey, you can hear it, sort of.
Is an open source component that provides a simple user interface for data stored in S3. Authorized end users can easily browse files, create folders, and upload files from the same apps they use today. They can also download and delete data if needed. There are a few ways you can set this up for our application. The best way to do this for your entire workforce is to use Amazon S3 access grants with AWS IAM Identity Center with a trusted token issuer. With Identity Center, we can connect to a trusted token issuer like Microsoft Entra ID or Auth0. Then we can create a new customer managed application that will use this token issuer. Amazon S3 access grants help us control scalable access to our S3 buckets. This will connect to our IAM Identity Center to share external accounts by using the AWS Resource Access Manager console with S3. If you want to connect your customers or third-party partners to your data in S3, you can use Amazon Cognito as your identity provider to connect to your S3 bucket for your front end. This is the easiest way to get started with Storage Browser. You can
Let me see if I can play it again. My video stopped. I think we kind of got the idea of it, though.
So I've got a question for you.
Yes,
here.
sir.
So, and this is going to be a bit of a rough question, and I don't mean to give you a hard time.
No problem.
So there is a company in Las Vegas that about 4 years ago was hosting on Amazon, and Amazon, for no reason foreseeably, pulled their account. Payment was due, all this other stuff. Because of the way they pulled it, it ended up creating a huge security breach where all of their user data was exposed, and within 24 hours they got taken offline and then lost all their user data. As you might imagine, this makes me even more skeptical of using AWS. So let's say these are all wonderful products and they will make our lives easier and all of this. What would you say to, in terms of this pseudo social contract with it, what would you say about folks concerned about hosting with AWS for these reasons?
Wow. Yeah. Well, I'm first to say that I'm sorry that happened to that business. Was it in Vegas?
Yeah, it was Parlor.
Parlor. Oh wow. I don't know anything about what happened there, so I don't know if I can comment on that. But that sounds awful. Whatever happened. But we definitely, like I had mentioned at the beginning, AWS and security is the most important. Service and reliability is important. We have, just with hosting ourselves, we kind of building all the internal tools that we have, and there's obviously different regions that we have and different fallbacks.
It seemed hyper polarized and political, and one of the things I think about engineering is we've got all these great tools, and isn't it nice if we work on building? So it's a concern I have. I work on Vice projects. I'm used to having to deal with navigating some of this kind of stuff, but I don't know if, since you're here from Amazon, I don't know if there's been a policy change or there's something clear where folks could understand, even if we say AWS says it's okay to work in these industries and not in those others, where might we find that terms of service that's more, to make it maybe more pointed?
Maybe afterwards we can talk more in like one-on-one. I can maybe look into that more. I don't think I have an answer for you right now, unfortunately.
All right, fair enough. Thanks so much.
Yeah. But no, that's a good question. All right. We still...
storage.
Yeah, we don't want to hear that again. All right. So functions. The Amplify functions are built on top of Lambda, which is our serverless. We can use serverless compute there. It's very versatile. So once again, with the idea of being just a handful of lines of code that you can use to help create a Lambda function, it'll set this up for you. And then you can have it connected behind our AppSync service, or you can use it, like let's imagine when a user logs in. I have an example of this I'll show you later, where as soon as the user signs up, that is, we can have code run that checks a few things, and then you can set up a Lambda to do that. And so we just made it really simple to set this up and to add this to your app. So here is a typical workflow of an app that's hosted on Amplify. We have hosting, which is the service that you would be hosting your website. Then you would have your front end. This is obviously very simplified. Then you might even create your whole app. Like I said, this is a la carte. You might use some of our UI components. You might use our libraries, some of our designs, our UI design library, that is. And then we have a cloud backend with our auth data storage. And then we have Gen 2 you might be using to host the app. And then we do have some things on our Gen 1 side, which I won't get into, but that's a way you can create your apps using the CLI. And I better not step on this and knock it over. So you kind of see, like, you can have your whole ecosystem in the AWS world. All right, so this is an AI meetup, so we're finally getting to the AI part after 30 minutes, but that's okay. So what about AI? What's the deal with that? So what we did last year is we saw, man, everybody's using AI. Amazon released something called Amazon Bedrock, which is a collection of large language models that you can use in your apps. So who uses ChatGPT? Yep, probably everybody. Anybody use Claude 3, Anthropic? Yep, a lot of people. So we're like, let's take the most popular large language models. We'll have them in this API that anyone can use, and it's protected by AWS. And on top of that, let's see if we can make it easy for developers to use those. And there's a lot of, by the way, this is just one of many ways you can talk to Amazon Bedrock. And this is using TypeScript. I know probably a lot of you use Python, but we wrote this in TypeScript. So you can create like a schema and say, hey, here's our system prompt. You're a helpful assistant. Description, used to search for rental listings. Description, to get weather. So we add in tools. Anybody use tools? Anybody heard of tools? So this is a way you can like create functionality in your LLM to connect to do different things. Like a common scenario is like maybe you want to create a tool that says, hey, Claude 3, connect to this database to help you find information. And you can add tooling to it. And so we made it very simple to add tools and to connect to like Lambda functions and do those things. We have built-in access control. So we wanted to make it sure it's very simple as well to connect or to protect your whole application with authorization. So maybe only guests or authenticated users, or maybe you have groups or public API keys. You can set that all up. And we have a lot of different access controls. And then we wanted it to make sure it can work with the whole AWS ecosystem. So all your favorite services, you can kind of connect it together. You just use React, you have AppSync, Bedrock, it all connects together there. Then we added a UI library. And the UI library is just with a few lines of code. You can then add in a chat widget, which we'll take a look at in a little bit, and you can do some really fun things with it. So you can set up conversational UIs.
Is this just basically just for LLMs, or do you use other multiple models?
It would be, so you can use this with the large language models that are built in with Amazon Bedrock, which are like Claude 3,
So
Nova, large language models, yeah.
So you're not doing any voice recognition, voice, text, voice to text, or picture to?
Yes, we do. It supports, and I'll show you. So like it depends on the large language model. So like if you choose Claude 3 V2, it supports, or V1, it supports like uploading images, and we do this conversational chat widget also supports that. So you can upload images, have it identify it, and then respond back to it. We also have imports in, so if any SageMaker users here, that's kind of our more AI playground. That you can like take a SageMaker large language model that you've trained yourself, and then you can import it into Bedrock, and then you can use it with this system I'm showing you today as well. But like, we don't have a lot of large language models that do, I'm trying to think if we have ones that specifically do like text to speech.
Well, that's a different type of, that's not
Yeah.
a language model, it's a little different
Yeah.
model.
We do have something called Amazon Poly that does those things, but it's not,
But it's not incorporated into Bedrock.
no.
Okay. I was just trying to understand kind of how many models, and if this could be something more of an AI agent than just a large language model.
Yeah, we do. So there is something called AI agents. There's an agent way of putting together your models inside Amazon Bedrock.
Okay.
So there is ways to do that too with what I'm kind of showing you today.
Can I hop in for a sec?
Yeah.
One of the things about AWS is that prior to the explosion with LLMs in the AI space, they were easily the most advanced provider of machine learning tools of all the cloud providers. All of that is still there. And there's a term that they use that's industry-wide called foundation model. Have you heard of that? Okay. But a foundation model is something that you have built for a specific purpose. They have a number of foundational models that are underlying some of their LLM services, underlying Poly and a variety of other services. On top of that, there's a marketplace at AWS where you can get third-party services that you can plug into your environment and talk to through all the same connectivity that you've seen here with the services that Erik has been talking about today. So you can also bring in other tools from other vendors, and there's dozens or not more than that now available. So just about anything you might imagine you'd want to do, if it's not done internally by AWS, it's probably provided by one of their providers. So I just thought I'd throw that out there because I've used a couple of those. They're very, very good.
Yeah, well, I saw the code and you basically have an AI and then it specifies the model.
Well, one of the
Over
things-
here, yeah, this is
Yeah, Claude 3.5
This-
on it.
model right here, and I was just wondering how, how comprehensive that line
There's,
is.
last time I looked, there was like 12 different models that you could choose from. Some of them are LLMs, some of them foundation models doing image processing, which you also asked about.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea is that about Bedrock, that's not immediately obvious when you see this, is that they have a sort of lowest common denominator API. If you stay within that, you can just switch between models.
Right.
Why might you switch between models? You might switch between models because one is less expensive and gets the job done. Maybe it's DeepSeek, something like that. But then you need to pull the gloves off and use a more expensive model because it offers something that the other models aren't doing. So you can actually, in the same application, you can switch between which backend LLM, but you're talking to one interface, which cuts down on your programming
Yeah.
time. Okay.
I was just basically trying to figure out kind of how comprehensive that one line is and what the different inputs you could put in there. Or, as you said, it sounds like, there's other things that you can finagle to be able to.
Yeah, it's where, if you go on the AWS site, look at Bedrock, they have a list of all the models available and they talk about all the different features available in each. It's worth looking at, it's pretty cool. I don't think anybody else has quite done that yet.
Yeah, definitely. Well put. Definitely a lot of different models we support. I will say, depending on how you get that model in, like if you're using the third-party marketplace, that won't necessarily work with this. There's other ways to talk with it.
Yeah, so basically, this is your,
So there is a
easy
limited
way,
amount
but
of-
there's other ways to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, to talk to different models that you want to add in. Like DeepSeek, like there's a marketplace for to add a DeepSeek model, but you can also bring it in from SageMaker. You can also bring it in a few different ways to try it out.
So separate from the code generation, you could use your voice to text service, wire that in ahead of calls to your internal language models.
Yeah, there's definitely.
Rather than using the code generation.
Yes. Yeah, I think some of those advanced scenarios we can look at a little bit more. But yeah, there's ways of, like with tools, might be you can create your own Lambda function that maybe talks to a couple different services, maybe talks to Bedrock directly and pulls it back some information. And you can do some more advanced scenarios other than, this is like a very straightforward, maybe simple example where you're like, okay, here's a large language model. We're going to have some prompts here. But obviously in real world, it gets much more complicated depending on what you're trying to do.
I've been trying to scroll through the list. It's like 40 items long in terms of different models available. So.
Also, Nova is our own, if you Nova is our own AWS trained model that was released last year at reInvent. So that's kind of like a cheaper model that you can use that's in par with some of these other models. And also DeepSeek, if you like try to get the largest model in DeepSeek and have that hosted, it is quite expensive because it's like 600 billion parameters. Someone correct me on that. It's a lot. So you can also do these things called response components. This is another part of the API where you could have, if you're using that chat widget, you can say, hey, if it sees a certain type of message being returned or asked, use this component to display the information. And then we use full stack TypeScript. So this would be like if you're a React developer and you're wanting to have a really nice card in here. How are we doing on time? We got a little bit of time?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. Amazon Q Developer. I want to just give a quick shout out to that. I mentioned this already. This is our free VS Code extension, free plugin to a bunch of different of your favorite IDEs that gives you all sorts of things to do code completion and to help you code. So we have like coding recommendations. Agents can autonomously help you implement features, refactor code. You can even give a command to like have it start doing upgrades, like if you have an older version of Java to a newer version of Java. We've been putting a lot of time and effort into this. If you're using Amazon, it's a kind of a no-brainer to use something like Amazon Q Developer because it's been trained a lot on our own services. And it has best-in-class security and vulnerability scanning. There's also something called Amazon Q Web. So if you're in the AWS console and you get stuck somewhere, there's like a little icon that looks like this. You can click on it and you can ask it a question. And that's actually powered by Amazon Q too. All right, so let me show you a demo. All right. So going back to some questions I had earlier about here on the right-hand side is some code. So this is the schema. This is using Amplify AI Kit is what we're calling it. And this is how we're defining our calls to our backend large language models behind Amazon Bedrock. So I have made this little demo AI story generator, which hopefully if the internet works, we'll see it. But demo gods, we'll see how it goes. So here's the model I'm using, Claude 3 Sonnet. And also, if I just delete this, you can see here's all the different models that are available that I can just add in here, like Amazon Nova Lite, Micro, Pro, a bunch of Claude, Cohere, Llama, Mistral. And then if there's an additional model that you want to add that's not on this list, there's another way, another API to add in like imported modules. So I added a system prompt here. You are a storyteller finder. This is probably for you system prompt engineer people. This is probably not the greatest prompt, but it's probably fine for our use case in this demo. You're a storyteller finder. You will assist the user in finding a story that matches the story string, title string, or ID. And then we have some tools, but we'll get to that in a second. But let's see if we can just build a story. So I need some audience participation. Someone come up with an animal.
Platypus.
Platypus, okay. And what?
I could spell.
And Platus. Platypus, something like that. Okay, what's the scenario that Platypus is in?
At a Mariah Carey concert.
At a what concert?
Mariah Carey concert.
Platypus, I can't spell. Platypus is at a, how about we just say a concert, and is dancing to music. Okay.
I like your spelling of platypus.
I know. What's the right? There it is. Thank you. So I might have to do this. Let me refresh this page, make sure. Okay, my internet's working. Let me copy and paste this in here. So now I hit the button, so it's going to go up to the large language model. It's going to create a story using that system prompt. And then I'm also having it generate a picture for that story that we just created. Now, here it is. It's a warm summer evening, and the outdoor concert was in full swing. Perry the platypus found himself in the middle of the crowd. See, he's like dancing. So it created the story, and now I have the picture. And so this is using stable diffusion to make this fun little picture. You can obviously see if anybody tells what AI pictures are. You can probably easily tell this is AI generated.
Acoustic guitar and music though, right?
Yeah, there's a couple people with guitars in the background.
All of them have acoustic guitars. Mariah Carey doesn't have acoustic music. Like, that's just funny how like you would think it would pull something.
Oh, I just put concert. I didn't put Mariah Carey.
I just know Mariah Carey, pardon me.
So now we created this fun story, but let's see what some other capabilities we can do with this. One is we have this something called tool use. Like I said earlier, this is ways of like creating, like taking your LLM model and maybe having it connect to other data. So I have one called list stories. So this says, this lists all stories from the story model. Use it to find stories with the story field and display them to the user. So let's see if it works here. So I'm going to go to chat mode, and I can ask it a question. So it should search the story. So search the story about, okay, maybe I should find me the story about the platypus. So now here is a chat interface that I created. I used that same components you saw on that previous screen. It was just a few lines of code. I'll show that in a second. And now it's going to find that story. So it actually looked inside our DynamoDB database and our GraphQL interface, and it found it. Perry Platypus moves. And now it's going to tell me the title and give me the story. Now I think this is fun, but if I was in a chat interface, and maybe this was like a customer interface, I would probably want it to make it look a little nicer. So I can do that. This is a React app, and I have this response component. And if you remember from that previous slide, I said you can create response components. That way, when you ask certain inputs, that it frames it in a nice little component. And I created a component called story card. So I'm going to do a little bit of live coding here. I'm uncomment that out. I'm going to save it. And now I'm going to ask the same question again. I'm going to refresh it. Find me a story about I'm going to say show me. Show me the story about the platypus. So now it should notice like, hey, this is used to display a story to the user. So let's see if it finds it. It's going to find the details. And here it is. So here's a little card I made. This is a React component. And Perry Platypus moves. So here's the title of it, and then here's all the text. And this is in a one called story card. You can see here this story card component right here. So this is a React component, and basically it takes an ID, story, and title, and then it displays it. And this is all React and Tailwind code. Yep.
So how did it figure out to use that?
Oh, because of this prompt, it's kind of like a prompt, but in this chat component, I added what's called a response component. It's a prop that you add into this AI conversation. This essentially created this window here. This is AI conversation component. I did a little CSS to make it look a little nicer. And then I added this response component prop, and it has this description. It says, use to display a story to the user. So based on this description, it knows that I asked to show a story. It's going to look, the component's going to look through here, the LLM's going to look at it and say, oh, he's asking for a story, I'm going to use this card to display it.
So this is actually an example of RAG. Okay, so when he created the story, it was stored in a database. Now what he's doing is saying, hey, find the story and show it to me. So it's doing retrieval augmented search. It's going and finding the story and using further generation capabilities to present it. So it's an example of RAG. Here you go.
Yeah, I'll show you another example in a second too.
Yeah, that's actually related to my question. So just to get a better sense of what's actually going on, like if you go back to the tool use prompt, like is the language model just taking that description and figuring out what to do, or is there elsewhere in the code where you like specified to do RAG?
No, this is all you need to do is you specify this tool usage right here. You're saying.
So like it's figuring out like, oh, based on this description, entirely from this description,
And
this
this
sounds
model.
like reg, I need to search.
And I put a.ref story. This is where the data is located. So if you go to aref story, this is the model story right here. This says, hey, we have a title and story. This is where it knows where to go to look for it.
Cool. And then also, like, when you require the model to output structured outputs, does that, like, is that limited to the foundation model already being pre-trained to be able to output that? Or, like, what if you picked a foundation model that's just for chat completion?
Yeah, so yes, you have to use the right foundational large language model that supports, like.
Oh, okay. So Amazon's not doing anything special
first
there.
It supports tool usage. Not all large language models support tool usage.
Yeah, okay.
And second, you would have to be able to accept like a text input that it can use.
So so when you showed like all the list of models that you can choose,
Yes.
did Amazon like already pre-restrict it all to like have standardized, like every model you can choose already does structured outputs?
These ones, yes.
Okay.
You know what?
So you can't even
That's a good
pick one.
question. I don't know. There might be some use cases where these don't. I think these all have structural outputs. I'd have to double check.
Structured outputs?
Like, what do you mean by structured outputs? Like,
Well, I mean, like the original LLMs just do like, string completion basically, right?
right.
So like,
Yeah, so these are all
did you like
compatible.
pre-restrict everything to do structured outputs? Otherwise, like if you just do like a normal chat completion one, like does it throw an error later? Like, I don't know how to do that. Like,
Is structured outputs unique to OpenAI?
no, a lot of the like I think Claude 3 can do JSON output, for example. They like specifically.
I think they have to.
Yeah.
So let me speak to it. When I looked at this API in depth, there's a standard set of functionality that presents, behind which all these different models fit. If you're using the standard API, then it's the lowest common denominator, meaning that all the functionality used will be available regardless of the model you use. If you make a call to one of the models that has an additional non-lowest common denominator functionality, then of course you're not going to have that work, and you would write your code to have a fallback, right? But
So like it'll throw like a runtime error.
no, yeah, I guess it would if you didn't count for it. But of course, you'd know when you're making a call outside the standard API, and you'd code to say, if I'm not using a model that supports this, then tell the user, do something different, whatever. Okay.
I can tell you that all the models I tested with, this worked fine. I haven't tested every single model that we had on that big list there, but everything worked better. Obviously, like Claude V2, like will work better than some of the other models. Yeah, go ahead.
So my question is, can this system dynamically choose the model based on the input?
No, so it will. Let me answer that. So this is, you can set the model for this chat one, and it's set to Claude 3 Sonnet, and that's during build time. You can't like dynamically change that during runtime. However, you can have these tools, and these tools can talk to any different database or Lambda function or whatever you want, and then it will be smart enough, depending on the prompt that you, or whatever you ask it, which I can show you in a second, to know which one to look up. You can create multiple of these schema, so you can have like a chat, maybe you have chat 1, chat 2, chat 3, and then different parts of your front end code. You could be like, in this case, use chat 1, which uses this large language model, and this part, use chat 2. But when you define them, you have to define them all. You can't dynamically change the model at build time.
Is like it'll be like a build time error if you didn't use that model.
Right. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question.
No, yeah, please.
Yeah, so
these
let
are
me
great
just
questions.
make sure that I understand. So
Yes.
the first thing we did was basically, let's create a story. So we created a story, and that story was then written to a database,
Yes, so
right?
exactly.
So basically, it looks like you have the title, the story, and an ID.
Yeah,
at
so-
minimum going to the database, correct?
Yeah, title and story, and also
All right.
I have, I'm saving the image in S3, and it
Okay.
has the same ID as this story. That's
Okay.
how I'm able to retrieve it all.
And then the next part is with the cards is essentially you asked another question like, can you tell me, or what was the the
Show
name
me
of-
the story about the
Yeah,
platypus.
show me the story. So basically, that was basically going back to the database and being able to find all the stories of platypuses. If there was more than one, you would have more than one of these cards created.
It would ask you which one you wanted.
Oh, it would ask, okay.
Yeah, and then you can
All right.
choose which one, and then it could show the card for it.
And then, okay, so you have one large language model that will basically create the story. Can you use another one for doing the analysis of the database? Or is it the same, are you forced to use the same model?
Yeah, so you want, let me see if I understand your question correctly. So you want to have one model that looks up the story, and then a different model that will like display the.
Correct, because some models are very good at creation, being able to create. Then other models you want not to be so creative and more being able to pull. So just trying to understand the flexibility of model usage.
Well, this card is created using React. It's basically passing in the story title and ID that it retrieved from the story model. So it says, so basically I say this question here, show me the story about the platypus. The way, I should probably put a graph next time. Come here, this is good questions. So I say, show me the story about the platypus. It's going to use this Claude 3 Sonnet model. It's going to look in the database using this tool usage right here. It's going to pull the three things that I'm looking for. The story, which is a string, title, and ID, is passing it to the story card. The story card is then generating, it's basically grabbing the image too, and then it's displaying the story.
Okay.
But no, you can't like split that between both of those. You would have one large language model that would go to the database, grab the data, and then it passes to the story card and then displays
Okay,
it.
so the large language model is not necessarily reading the story to get context over. It's just identifying it. You're just basically, this code is just basically identifying a story that has a platypus in it, and then you can choose which one.
Well, it is going to the database and it's searching the database for platypuses, and it's finding all the stories with platypuses.
Okay.
Once it finds one, it grabs the three pieces of information and sends it to the card.
Okay. There's no interpretation so you would have to have the word platypus in the story. You wouldn't necessarily, if somebody's used the story of a mammal, lives in the water and so forth in Australia, it would not necessarily be.
Oh, let's try it.
Okay.
So show me a story of a mammal.
With a duck-bill.
A duck-bill, thank you.
A duck-billed
mammal.
Duck-billed mammal. Show me a story of a duck-billed mammal. Let's see if it's smart enough to realize that's a platypus, or if it's just using the keywords a duck-billed. Oh yeah, it looks like the platypus pool hustlers. That's a different. That's
He already did it.
That's actually a second story. There was another platypus story I just realized we had. We might have two in our database.
Really good.
And we found it.
Yes, this is another one that a different. Funny enough, last week someone actually asked another platypus story.
That's hilarious.
These ones mean business. They don't leave
But I'm not sure why.
Two quick questions. One, can we do this with vanilla JavaScript?
Yes, yeah. So it's TypeScript's a superset of JavaScript.
Call me old school. I just like my vanilla JavaScript.
Well, let me rephrase that. So the build tools and everything use TypeScript. You could write it in JavaScript, but it's it will still it'll still compile and try to compile using TSC and everything.
So I see that you have a schema. Is there an option for multiple schemas? And if so, can there be foreign key relationships?
Okay. Yes. So you can have multiple models here, and
so we have, let's say, author.
So you can add an author, and then you can do has many, has one. You can do many-to-many relationships.
Okay, so there is multiple models.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
GraphQL. It's
okay.
just about anything you want.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. All right, cool.
Oh, there's another question. think you right back at you.
I think we're gonna have to wrap up here soon. Maybe just one or two more questions. Yeah.
Okay, so I think this is a good one to kind of wrap up with. But who is AWS really targeting? Obviously client-side engineering, but how does that conversation look like at a mid-sized company where you already have a lot of AWS infrastructure? It's fragmented naturally the way it is, and there's a lot of control about who's doing what. I'm thinking about my SRE team saying no, we're not going to deploy a bunch of front-end engineers to have full access to this stuff. How are you guys positioning that?
That's a good point. So Amazon Bedrock in general, not just the Amplify version I'm showing here, has I'm showing you one way to talk to Bedrock, but like I said before a couple times, there's a lot of different ways to doing this. And that is for anyone from startups to enterprises. We have enterprises that are using it. So that's pretty much for any business can use it. And then we have these different models and different model pricing depending on what you're looking for. This in particular, Amplify, is really geared towards front-end and full-stack developers who want to build on AWS services. But to that point, we have small customers that are startups that are using our hosting service to large enterprise customers that are also using individual pieces of Amplify. So we might have a customer that has 10,000 employees that is using Amplify hosting, but maybe they don't use this AI kit stuff that we're showing right now. So it depends on which part of it. We also have a lot of people that just use the JavaScript and TypeScript libraries, and they don't use any of the rest of it. So I guess to answer your question, specifically if you're using Gen 2 and some of these it's more like front-end and full-stack apps developers. Yep.
Do you have a pricing, what do they call, prediction tool that you can say, hey, if I get this many users using this stack, I should expect a bill that's 1,000.
That's funny you asked. My colleague, she just made a video on that same thing. I'll look it up here in a second. I'll find it. But yeah, first, inside AWS, there's a way you can put billing limits and be able to do, so that way you don't get overcharged. That's one maybe slight criticism you might hear of AWS is oh, I did something wrong and I got a $1,000 bill. Yeah. But you can set up billing limits to set that up. There's also a billing calculator that you can use to help do it. A video that we just released by one of my colleagues used this open source tool that helps you estimate your costs through AWS. And she connected up to Amazon Bedrock and created a really nice agent workflow to show, to estimate costs. I'll find that video. I'll bring it up here, but. Oh, sorry, I know you've been waiting.
Yeah, so I noticed the description for the tool use, the prompt is kind of worded in a nuanced way. A normal ChatGPT thing would be second person, right? Please summarize blah, 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 or whatever, but those are worded almost like API specifications. I'm just curious, have you found across all the different tool use enabled foundation models, that's becoming an industry standard for defining tool use? Or?
No, this is just me playing around with it and putting on different prompts.
And it just happens to work.
And
okay, you didn't actually read the documentation for Claude 3 or anything. Okay.
Well, no, there's definitely a lot of great documentation, especially on the Anthropic website, how to write really good prompts. And I have read it, but I think I was just playing around with this one and trying different prompts. But definitely those of you who write prompts a lot more than me can probably write much better ones and more specific.
Cool. Yeah, it's really cool that it just works.
Yeah.
It works. All right, guys.
Thank you.
Let's go get some lunch.